mind is like a restless animal that craves being fed.
This looks like Manhattan almost.
Well, this is the result of growing at 7% for almost 20 years. And how that has been possible? Because of something so simple like this. This is the
How can
pension.
something so small or simple be the foundation of this?
This is the pension passbook that every Chilean worker has. They generally carry it here in the back pocket because a worker doesn't use a jacket. And every month, 10% of their wage goes here in order to be accumulated during 40-45 years, growing with compound interest. And when they reach 65, they don't look to the government for a pension, but they look to the last line of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a lot of money, and that money has fueled economic growth in Chile and all this that you are seeing.
How come you decided to work with the government of General Piñera in the 70s?
I was at Harvard during the years in which the Chilean crisis happened. And I had to decide, and maybe it was the most difficult decision in my life, of whether to stay forever as a professor, something that I really love. I love to teach, I love to study, or to come back to help my country, to go back toward the democratic system, at the same time to solve the problems of poverty and underdevelopment. It was a very difficult decision, but I do believe that if you have the privilege of having a good education, and if you can make a difference for your country, you should go back and fight with all the risks. The whole experience could have ended in a terrible way. It's very difficult to transform an authoritarian government that came because of a civil war into a democratic one. There are very few examples in the world. But yet I thought it was what I should do from a moral point of view. It was difficult because I am a man who loves freedom. I love democracy. I love free markets. Chile had nothing of that. We were a semi-socialist country with an authoritarian government. Immediately after a quasi-civil war, the country was destroyed, the economy was in crisis. But I felt it was my moral duty to come back and try to help my country, always loyal to my principles, of course. And that's what I did.
So what were the circumstances? You came back in 75, I think, but you didn't join the government until 78. Under what circumstances were you recruited?
Well, I came back with a Harvard PhD that is very prestigious in Chile to teach at the university. But I said I will not be able to make a difference only staying at the university, writing books, writing papers. So I created a TV program. I believe enormously in the power of ideas well communicated.
So you were an economist on television?
I was an economist in television. I was an educator of the people rather than only the students. So I had this program for 2 years, and it soon became quite well known because nobody was at that moment proposing individual freedom, responsibility, private enterprise, opening to the world, and also saying that that would create a middle class. And that middle class will like to have democratic processes, because once you create a middle class, they want the rule of law in order to protect their lives, in order to protect property. So it was a very unusual message, until one day I am invited to give a conference at the university. It was the annual big conference. Everyone in Chile was there. Several ministers were there. And they were explaining how Chile was simply solving the crisis, the hyperinflation, the balance of payment crisis. It was a lot of macroeconomics. So I decided to do something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I said, why don't we think about the Chile of the next 10, 20 years? Why we had this social desperation that led ultimately to the destruction of democracy? Because we are a poor country. There is so much desperation in the people that cannot go up in the ladder of economic well-being. So
no social mobility.
no social mobility. You cannot redistribute income in a very poor society in order to solve poverty. The only way is fast economic growth, as the European countries and America had in the 19th century. So for the first time in Chile, I said, Chile is a country that can grow at 7% a year for 10, 20 years. I want to remind you that my country had always had growth of 2, 3%. You understand, when you grow at 3% a year, and your population grows at 2% a year.
So it's only 1%
Exactly.
unit year growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So imagine a typical worker who is poor, whose wage go up from 100 to 101 the next year. You don't see the difference. So even though the political process offered people, we elect me and I will solve poverty, that doesn't happen. The only way is for the country to have fast economic growth.
So you, I mean, in a way, you reverse the formulation of the problem from a macroeconomic to an individual level.
Exactly. Instead of being the political process the solution, I said, if we unleash the energies of the people, if we eliminate the incredible regulation that we had from the Spanish monarchy, remember, we come from the Bourbons in Spain. You see, everything was centralized in Madrid, and our colonial system was incredibly centralized. So I said, why don't we go to a system where you give freedom to the people? You cannot imagine what a free people can do.
And this speech you made attracted the interests of the military government and the generals.
Well, it was very interesting. In the audience, there was a Navy man, an admiral, who was at the same time the Minister of Planning of the military government. And I had never had any relation with the military government. I had never seen the president. I was just coming from Harvard. You can imagine I was a humanist. I love to see the human being at the center of the universe. So my speech was quite different from what they had heard. And at the end of the conference, where I said Chile can be a developed country, can have a democracy, can have a middle class, can have full employment, but if we do the following 10, 15 reforms, this is not a miracle. That admiral came to me and said, this is incredibly interesting. Your colleagues, the so-called Chicago boys, are more technocratic. They talk about numbers, balance of payment,
monetary
system. But you're talking about human freedom, human dignity, democracy, free society. Would you like to give the conference to the president of Chile, General Pinochet, whom I had never seen? I had only seen him with those dark glasses, like a little fear of him. I was only 28 years old. I was very young. Maybe I was born.
So you accepted the challenge?
I accepted the challenge. I said, well, if I can change my country and I have to give a conference to General Pinochet or to President Allende or to whoever, I will give it. I am a non-partisan person. I believe in freedom. I believe in dignity. I believe in equality of opportunity. I believe in democracy. So he said, okay, the next day.
So the day after?
And the day after, this admiral drives me there, and then in the car he tells me, do you know, José, that not only the president will be there, will be the 4 commanders-in-chief of all the Navy, the Air Force, the whole cabinet, 20 ministers, and the whole undersecretaries, the number